Hello and welcome to the Complete Analyst. This video is designed to give you a good working definition for operating model strategy. It's part of our What Is series defining common terms that many analysts need to work with. Perhaps one of these is you. Now, I'm not claiming that this is the only correct definition you can use, but perhaps this one will make your life as an analyst just a little bit easier. So what is an operating model strategy and why should you care? If you have seen some of our other videos, you already may have a pretty good idea because it just joins two other existing concepts. You can also tell, just by looking at the term, that this is something you are likely to encounter early on in an enterprise change initiative, particularly if the scope of that initiative is to make a major change to how the enterprise as a whole will function. Usually, but not always, this will be described as some kind of business transformation or digital transformation sponsored at the senior executive or board level. So let's see if I can provide a good operating definition that might help you. As you can see here, the definition of operating model strategy is a straightforward combination of two things. Our video on operating model explained that it must cover the full stack from business down to the physical level, as you see on the left. In that video, I also pointed out that the term operating model wasn't enough to cover its different representations over time. One of those representations, and usually the first one defined, is the strategy, which we have described as a specific course of action chosen from a set of reasonable alternatives. My guess, though, is that this may not be quite enough for you to get a good grasp on what this might mean or how you might even create an operating model strategy. Fortunately, there's an excellent framework available that's been around for a while that provides a practical approach that might work for you. So let's explore that now. I'd like to start by recommending a book. This one, Enterprise Architecture as Strategy, published in 2006, has become a bit of a classic and does an excellent job in structuring the strategic alternatives for an enterprise operating model. It lays out 4 basic operating model types from which an enterprise may choose based on how it wants to grow. These are the 4 you see here: coordination, unification, diversification, and replication. Consistent with our definition of strategy, each of these choices represents a reasonable alternative to the others. Using this approach, the essence of operating model strategy is about choosing one of these operating model types over the others. Now, before I go much further, I'll admit that I'm oversimplifying this a bit to illustrate what an operating model strategy is. There's also much more behind this than I have time to discuss, and I really wouldn't do it justice. So I do strongly recommend buying and reading this book. Please see the video notes for a link. So let's work through some examples. If you chose unification on the upper right, your operating model would feature standardized business processes and centralized data. Examples of this type are airlines and large integrated manufacturers. A coordination model on the upper left would focus on shared customer data, but processes, while linked, would be less standardized by business unit. Many banks with different lines of business, such as deposits, insurance, and investments, but working with the same set of customers, will use this model. A replication model on the lower right features standardized processes, but local data. Hotel and restaurant chains are frequently, but not always, of this type. And finally, the diversification model on the lower left will have some shared processes, usually for shared services such as HR and finance, but local data that suits each individual business unit. Large conglomerates will often have this model as it suits their growth and acquisition strategy. Now, when you consider these alternatives, you can imagine that the choice you make would have a profound impact on the structure and detail of the operating model vision and architecture to follow. What we aim to build for a unification model is going to be quite different than what we aim to build for a diversification model. That's because of the strategic choice we have made here. So now we get to the decision point. The enterprise will need to make a choice. In this case, we chose the unification model as our strategy. That choice will drive many tactical and operational decisions to follow as the operating model vision, operating model architecture, and subsequent designs and implementations are developed. Of course, it's possible that your choice may be some kind of hybrid, or different at the enterprise level as opposed to an individual business unit or subsidiary. These things are always a bit more complicated than I'm illustrating here, but I'm just trying to keep this as simple as possible to illustrate our main point. So to sum up, an operating model strategy combines the concept of operating model and strategy in order to make a fundamental choice about the future structure and scope of the enterprise's operating model. The book, Enterprise Architecture as Strategy, provides a very good framework for making these choices using 4 basic patterns. Alternatively, you may choose a different way of defining these strategic operating model alternatives than the approach as defined in this book. If that works best for you, that's okay. The main thing is to remember that the alternatives must be reasonable and that you have chosen a defendable course of action for your operating model strategy. Thanks for watching.